Welcome to the Good Reading Magazine podcast. Good Reading is a monthly magazine dedicated to books and reading and aims to help readers discover their next favourite book. You can find out more about the books discussed on today's podcast at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.
As a 17-year-old military officer, Aaron Tait was deployed to Iraq immediately after 9/11. A move to East Africa at 25 saw him leading aid projects in crisis zones and urban slums. Aaron has worked in more than 70 countries across the globe as a military officer, humanitarian, and social entrepreneur. As a co-founder of the impact organisations YGAP and Education Changemakers, Aaron has helped improve the lives of people living in poverty. Today I'm talking to Aaron Tait about his memoir, Far Horizons, A Journey from War to Peace. Aaron, welcome to the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Greg. Great to be here.
Far Horizons begins with an account of a 3-week scuba diving course, part of a series of training programs towards qualifying as a clearance diver for the Royal Australian Navy. It sounds inhumane. The pain, the exhaustion, the abuse, not to mention the potentially permanent injuries you might incur. Most people would ask this simple question: why?
Great place to start, Greg. I was 17 when I was on that course. I had been selected from the 80 or so other officers of my Navy officer course. They thought that I was different. They thought I had something about me that might be worthy of Special Forces selection. And I think there's something in some young men, I'd argue still many young men, of them wanting to prove themselves, wanting to prove that they have the right stuff. This was certainly the case in my family. I grew up in a family of all boys. Dad was in the military. My older brother joined before me. My grandfather was in the military, my great-grandfather. We had toy guns around the house. We played armies on the weekends. We read books about going off for these great adventures and fighting in wars. And this was my chance to do that, to prove myself. I had this feeling of this is how boys become men. Being selected for the Navy diving course was the ultimate because it was, the tip of the spear. And I wanted to pass that course, and then I wanted to be deployed to a war. I didn't have a war when I joined up, but I hoped quietly that one would emerge so I could go and test myself.
Yes, your childhood life sounds like quite an adventure. It also included quite a brutal initiation, which actually gave rise to the title of this book.
Like I said, boy's own childhood, sailing around the Persian Gulf of New Zealand in a little yacht that we had, a 23-foot yacht that Dad had found cheap in the newspaper, climbing cliffs and raiding beaches and G.I. Joe adventure stuff. And part of that was we were young hunters. So, as I was 10 and 11 years old, we're practicing with our little air rifles and shooting Pepsi cans in the garage. And then if we could graduate that, Dad would take us out for our first hunt. And we would go out into the New Zealand bush and we would hunt for animals, pigs and goats. And we were paid by the New Zealand Environmental Services to do this because they're an introduced species. So I went out there as an 11-year-old with Dad for my first shoot. And you're out there for a week in the bush, a few supplies in your backpack. But I talk about this in chapter 2 of the book. Very brutal initiation, in that first hunt. And Dad kind of wipes the blood on my face. He says that I've passed the rite of passage and I'm now a Tait man. And it's something that it's very brutal, yes. People are very detached from animals and meat if there are meat eaters these days. A lot of young men these days don't go through a rite of passage with their father or with other men in their community. It's quite rare. So in some ways it was a gift, but it was a difficult gift, Greg, to go through.
Do you think your childhood in some way set you up for something as grueling as the training for the Royal Australian Navy?
We certainly had resilience and toughness. We could push through the rain and the cold and we had that, Tait means, in the Scottish, it means cheerful warrior. So there was this attitude of we can push through stuff with a smile. My dad was a man's man, and we kind of were really impressed by him and what he had achieved and the clothes that he had hanging up in the closet that he would take out in the bush with him, and the boots that he would hike in. And so, yeah, I feel like we were pretty well prepared for it. I was underwhelmed when I joined the Navy, not as grueling as I expected. And the officer training was, lots of ironing uniforms and marching around the parade ground and pushing peas onto the back of our forks to eat like British gentlemen. And but it was when I got to the diving branch that was a new level of challenge for sure.
You said you were waiting for a war, and in the aftermath of 9/11, you were actually deployed to Iraq. Did you have any idea, any inkling what that experience might be like?
Well, when 9/11 hit, I was still 17 years old. On the last night of that diving course, one of the guys were watching on TV and he said, "We're all about to go to war." And I had this feeling of, yeah, but not me. Like, I'm 17. I can push peas under the back of my fork and march around the parade ground, but I'm not a warrior yet. But I was jealous. I looked around the other guys, the bigger, tougher guys, and I thought, they'll all go, and I can't believe I don't get to go. But within 8 hours, I got a text message saying, "You're deploying, get yourself back to King's Cross, to the base. HMS Sydney will be leaving today. You're on it." And then I thought, wow, I'm getting to go, but still I'll be in the nosebleed seats, I'll be hidden away somewhere. But then I get on board that ship and they tell me that day that I'll be doing the most aggressive high risk operations, which are called non-compliant boardings. So we'll be enforcing a siege on Iraq, making sure that anything that's coming in or out is things that we're happy to come in or out of the country. And we do that by very, very aggressive nighttime raids, essentially, on boats coming out of Iraq with oil. We fast rope on with 90-foot ropes from helicopters, or we throw grappling hooks from fast attack boats with caving ladders attached, and we climb our way up onto those ships. They don't want us to be on those ships. They have booby traps ready to go. They have doors shut and locked from the inside. So we get on quick. We avoid the booby traps if they've been set up. We slice our way into the ship with the steel, laser cutters that we've got. And hopefully we get inside and take control of the ship. We usually have a few minutes to do that because we're only in international waters for a period of time before that smuggler ship will realize we're trying to get them, and they will turn into the nation state waters of a nearby country. If you're in those nation state waters of a nearby country, you are officially a pirate at that point, and you could find yourself in a very sticky diplomatic situation and a Middle Eastern prison.
What is life like on a warship like the HMAS Sydney, and how does rank affect that experience?
My experience of it, I was a young officer, so I was a midshipman. You are the bottom of the barrel. You are lower than any junior sailor on board. You're technically an officer, but the nickname for us midshipmen, we're snotties. We're considered so pathetic that we wipe our snotty, runny noses with the sleeves of our jackets. And at best, you're ignored. At worst, you're mocked by the whole ship. That's the feeling you have as a midshipman. One day, you'll prove yourself and become a sub-lieutenant, then a lieutenant, and you'll finally get the respect of the sailors, but certainly not as a midshipman. So I, get on board HMS Sydney and I get the worst bed or rack, we call it, on the entire ship. Mine is right underneath the helicopter deck. So when the helicopter takes off, like everything is rattling. When the ship speeds up to anything above half speed, the whole, your bed is rattling as well. So you're hidden away in a way. But then when I was heading north to the Gulf, we were training to be these non-compliant boarding teams. So we're getting tear gas sprayed in our eyes. We're learning how to jump out of helicopters. We're learning close quarter combat training. We're learning how to put on gas masks in the event of biological warfare. So we're training all through the day. But then in the evening, I'm doing my navigation watches because that's what I'm supposed to be doing on board, is learning how to navigate a warship and become a captain one day. So I was averaging very little sleep in the whole deployment. I would be out at night doing these boardings. And then during the day, I was frantically trying to catch up with my officer training. So almost no sleep, a huge amount of trauma that you're getting from these missions that you're doing every night. And people are sort of getting on with it. No one's stopping to check in and see if you're okay. It's a big mean warship at war. So people are pushing ahead. So there's not much time to be with your own thoughts or put up your hand and say, you know what, I'm pretty traumatized right now, or I didn't like what we did last night, or hey, why are we doing this mission? And those doubts creep up, but there's no chance to voice them.
Aaron, what's the cumulative psychological effect of multiple missions as part of the non-compliant boarding unit?
So interestingly, with trauma, your body will react to a very dangerous situation, and it will have a stress response that will allow you to try to get out of that situation. It will help you to survive. So your stress levels come up. You come back from that mission, you take off your weapons, you clean them, you go get some chow, some food, and then you try to go to bed, but you can't because your mind is racing. And you're thinking, oh God, I almost died there, and geez, that guy got really close to dying there, and you're reliving a horrific injury you've just seen happen. And you get a couple of hours sleep, but then you wake up in the morning and you go out again. You do work during the day, but then that night you go out again. And then trauma, the stress comes up again. So what happens when you start to normalize operating at this level, and paramedics get this, firefighters get this, emergency nurses get this, is you stay at that level of stress. And that's really what post-traumatic stress is, that you can't get that stress level down anymore. So I think that's one element that we see a lot with particularly our soldiers and sailors and airmen in Australia. But another thing that starts to emerge is kind of a moral guilt. So I believe that on every mission that I was part of with my 14-man team in the Persian Gulf, we always did in the moment the right thing. So we were very careful with the smugglers we were fighting in many ways, or apprehending mostly. We always used our rules of operation. I can't say the same thing for the Americans that were up there, the Navy SEALs who were doing the same job as us. Far more gung-ho, trigger happy. But what started to emerge for me is this moral guilt of, okay, I'm traumatized from a mental health perspective, but in my soul, I no longer agree with this mission. I no longer agree with this war. I don't believe that if I get sent back to this war, that I'm willing to go and be in this fight anymore. And I would argue that's a deeper level of trauma and feeling than I would say the mental health challenge of the post-traumatic stress that I was feeling.
On a train journey from Delhi to Agra, you encountered a group of Indian men singing protest songs. We are angry that America is fighting these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Do you agree with us, comrade? They asked. How did you respond?
So I'd come back from the Persian Gulf, Greg, as a traumatized 18-year-old starting to feel real concern about that war that I'd just fought in. This war is still under the radar at this point. It's essentially a siege on Iraq from maritime channels. The army is over and the Air Force are spending their time in Afghanistan. So what's interesting is the news is not talking about these sanctions. This is not making the newspapers. My medals, Greg, don't say Iraq, they say Afghanistan. I've never been near Afghanistan. But legally, the mission we were doing was, let's put it under the banner of the war on terror. So because of that, there's not a conversation being had really by anyone. You're dealing with this trauma and you're looking at this war and you're thinking, geez, I don't think that was good. And I start to research this and I find that 250,000 women and children die because of the sanctions and the seizures that we enforced. Because that's what happens when there's no food in the stores and there's no medicine in the pharmacies. Because we've slowed down an economy so much. It's what we've seen also, to be honest, in Gaza in recent years. So when I get to India and I'm traveling and I'm trying to figure out who I am and whether I want to be a military officer, I'm just backpacking around the country, third-class sleeper trains. And then I hear these young Indian protesters and they're burning pictures of George Bush and they're burning American flags and they're in my train carriage. And I'm thinking, they just are generally talking about the war and they don't like the war. And good for them, they're going to a rally. But then they asked me that question, do you believe in this war? And I sort of dodged the question. But then one of these young leaders, these young Indians, says, well, I'm most concerned about these sanctions on Iraq. And I go, whoa, that's interesting. Like, how do you know about that? And on that train journey, I unload on him and I say, I enforced them and I was there. And he was like deeply saddened by that moment. He kind of couldn't believe that someone like me would do that. And he was angry of like, what are you doing? How can you be part of this? So in some ways, that young protester on that train in India, he was part of that catalyst to say like, hey, Aaron, it's okay for you to disagree with this war, even though you're a serving military officer. And it's okay for you to feel bad about that. But then what are you going to do about it?
Well, that's the next step, I suppose. And you're right. In my experience, most men take one of two options when they find themselves in turmoil. They do good or they choose bad. Which way did you go?
Well, I almost see it like this, like metronome when someone's learning the piano, tick tock goes each side. So the good was like, okay, could I do good? I'm studying economics as an officer at the Defence Force Academy, but I'm already looking at applying for master's degrees in international development and international politics, and that's what I'm spending my spare time reading about. So I have this growing desire, like I want to leave the military and move to Africa and just go to the toughest place and just help someone because I feel like I haven't helped people at all with what I've been doing as a military officer. So there's that. And then I feel like, God, I'm so far from that. I know that my next thing, once I graduate from the Defence Force Academy and graduate my clearance diver course, if I choose to go on and become a fully qualified Australian clearance diver, I'll be sent straight back to Iraq or Afghanistan. I'll be putting on a bomb suit and I'll be disarming bombs in a town square in the Middle East. And if I survive that, fantastic. If I mentally survive that, great. But that was what the future held for me. So I'm thinking, I want to go help the world, but I know my future is lined up that I have to go back and fight in this war that I completely disagree with now. So my response is to swing across that metronome to the bad, to drink my way out of this, to, excuse the language, but screw my way out of this. And I go to South America. I have, a couple months off that I managed to wrangle. I go to South America and I just jump into full hedonism. 20-year-old, just out there in the world, just going for it. Trying to forget the military. Come back, spend a couple of months at the Defence Force Academy, convince the Defence Force Academy that I can take 6 months off now. And then I go to Spain. And in Spain, at 20 years old, I'm running a nightclub. And it's like, it's go time. This is Aaron just indulging in all his demons and just going for it.
Now, that's quite unusual because you come from a fairly devout Christian family background. From what I've read in Far Horizons, it's a thread that runs through your life and something you might have grappled with from a reasonably early age. Where do you stand on that subject these days?
Yeah, I do not say that I'm a Christian these days, but I certainly grew up in a Pentecostal Christian family. My parents are still involved in the church and are great people, do lovely things in their community. But I stepped away from that. I had it told to me throughout my childhood and my youth that good was just doing, like following the rules. Like don't drink, don't have sex before marriage, don't do this, don't do that. And like you're a good person, well done. And that good person had deployed to what he thought was a good war and did the good thing. And I think the result was not good for the world. So as a young man, 2021, I'm like, you know what? That whole list of all the good stuff that I should have been following, like throw it out the window, just rip it up. And I'm going to be bad for a while. And so I just indulged in that. Absolutely. Until I met someone who was truly good. So in the depths of that, I was just exploring the bad, basically.
And then a woman named Caitlin walks into your life. You write, I took the momentum she had gifted to me. What happened next?
being in Spain in that place, completely escaping. I meet this gorgeous Californian girl, Caitlin, and she's bohemian and she's a hippie and she's just peaceful. And she's studying for 6 months in Europe and she sort of says to me, who are you? Like, what are you doing here? And all I tell her for the first 4 weeks that we're together is, I'm just escaping. And she doesn't push. She doesn't say, what are you escaping from? She realizes I won't even go there. And we fall in love. And we have these amazing 4 weeks together in Spain. And she's like no one I've ever met. And just her presence around me softens me and takes that feeling I've got to be a man and takes that trauma away and that moral guilt of you've done all this wrong and you've got to fix it and I stopped drinking my way out of the problem. I stopped trying to screw my way out of the problem. I just am fully present with this one person and it's a total gift. But it's 4 weeks, that's all it is, in Spain. She's just this sort of angel who comes into my life.
Africa was the next part of your life journey, but this time you weren't the lone wolf.
So Caitlin and I, there's something there, there's something really powerful for both of us. But it's crazy, we're 21 by then. She lives in California. I'm in the military sailing around, around Asia as a warfare officer. But we still keep calling each other. We still write letters. This is well before, Zoom and Skype and even Facebook, really. So there's letters being written and there's mixed CDs being recorded for each other. And we bond over this desire to be together because we're in love, even though we're so far apart, 14,000 kilometers away from each other. But also this bond to do good in the world. I'm doing it from a sense of guilt, like I've got to right my wrongs as penance. She's doing it from a sense of love, of I have a great deal of love and I want to help people and love them. And we bond over this desire to go and make a difference in the world. So we study these degrees, to both of us, and then we sell everything we own. And we, at 24 years old, take a one-way flight to Africa together, ready to do good. We're young, we have no job prospects. I've left the military by this point. Caitlin's just graduated from university and she's been working in a few cafes. So we have no money. We have no connections, but we take a one-way flight to East Africa. We land in Kenya. And we start volunteering for a few months in Kenya in a period that's one of the worst times in recent Kenyan history, with post-election violence and thousands of people being killed and hundreds of thousands of refugees. So we survived through those months, and then we get an offer to come and run a high school for street kids in Tanzania. And this is just like perfect, like it's a perfect opportunity for us, because it allows us to go and help some people and use our degrees. And we're just thrilled by this opportunity. But the township is tough, highest rates of malaria in Africa. HIV AIDS is, half the population has it. This is a place that Mzungus, which means crazy white people, we don't go in there. You're not supposed to be in that place. But that becomes our home and we live in the township for the next year. And we have malaria 5 times and we have curses from witch doctors and we try to transform this school. And that's the last part of the book, which is all the challenges and the love and the hope and the optimism and the pain and the suffering of living in a place like that, trying to do good.
I've only got one final question for you, Aaron. What do you want readers to take from your story? What message would you like to send to them and perhaps to the wider world?
The title is Far Horizons. It was a mantra my father gave to me when I was a teenager. And the feeling of that is, there's a horizon over there. Let's go and have a look. It's that feeling of living beyond yourself, living deliberately. So I want that for people. I want people to finish the book and make this noise like, huh, like be moved by it, disrupted by it. And then I want them to make an impractical decision in their life, like a rash decision. I want them to book a one-way flight somewhere. I want them to tell someone that they love them. I want them to leave something that they should have left a long time ago. In particular, I'm finding women are buying this book a lot. We've had great press over the last few weeks since it's been released with Hardy Grant a couple of weeks ago. 80% of the people who are buying this book are women. And I'm getting these long messages from female readers saying, oh, it made me think about this, and I sobbed here, and I laughed here, and I just was hoping so much here. And they're sharing all their feelings with me, which is really interesting. And I want those kinds of responses from people. I joke that it's Eat, Pray, Love with guns. So it sounds like a war book, but it's certainly more than a war book. There's a lot of heart and soul in this book. But equally, Greg, I'm worried about the fact that men are reading less and less every year. The ABC said the other week, only 10% of boys and men aged between 15 to 24 read once a day. That's a magazine, a newspaper, or a book. That terrifies me. And men are consuming content in many ways, but it just seems to not be through books as much anymore. So I want to get books in the hands of men. I want to get this book in the hands of men. And if a woman has to buy it for them and put it in their Christmas stocking, and it's the one book that man reads in the next 12 months, great. I want him to finish the book and go, wow, I just finished a book. I haven't done that in years. And I want him to be disrupted by it and go to the beach, during the Christmas holidays and be thinking about his life and who he is as a man. And so that's a sort of a secondary hope for the book. I hope it gets in the hands of men, because it's already getting in the hands of women, but we need Australian men reading again.
As you suggested, I'm about to go off and make an impractical decision. But before I do that, I'd like to thank you for joining me on the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
I've been talking to Aaron Tait about his memoir, Far Horizons, A Journey from War to Peace. It's published by Hardy Grant, and you can find it at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to Good Reading print and online magazine at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.